Thank you. Please sit down. His Excellency Philip Goldberg, Ambassador of the United States of America, Mr. Adam Levin, Chargé d'Affaires, Embassy of Israel to the Philippines, of course, um, Brother Armin Luistro, Secretary of Education, um, was very pleased to know that our team won yesterday. Secretary Edwin Lacerda, of course, Tita Nini. It's always a pleasure to see you. Mr. Ross Hodge, Ms. Peggy Ellis, Dr. Barbara Sasser, Undersecretary Manolo Quezon, Chairperson Maris Jokno, members of the Frieder and Quezon families, our dear Manilaners, friends from the Jewish community in the Philippines, friends from the business community, fellow works and government, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first of all to welcome you to Malacañan Palace. For a few of our honored guests returning to the Philippines on this visit, it is a very different building from the Malacañang you may remember before the Second World War, and even after it, when the bombing of Manila devastated our capital and left the palace as the only major government building still standing. We are told, for instance, that out of a population of about 12 million, we lost about 1 million of our countrymen because of World War II. Today, Malacañang Palace is a far more extensive structure, one that has witnessed the development of a nation from being a place where foreigners ruled to being the home of our own elected leaders. From the Marcos dictatorship and the eventual restoration of democracy to the present, where we are seeing the positive transformation of the Philippines. The story of Malacañang Palace will always be tied with the story of the Filipino people and also, though unbeknownst to many, with the story of more than 1,000 Jewish men, women, and children of Europe. In the mid to late 1930s, the Nazis were only beginning to display the violence against the Jewish people that would later become manifest in its terrible entirety as the Holocaust. Though the Philippines was thousands of miles removed from these events, our forefathers knew that oppression like this could not go unnoticed. Large crowds participated in public protests against Nazi actions, and the solidarity of Filipinos did not stop there. Through the leadership of then-President Manuel Quezon, the work of the Frieder brothers, and the help of High Commissioner Paul MacNutt, and then Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower, it became the policy of the Philippine government to allow the immigration of Jewish refugees into the country. I am told that the Philippines was prepared to accept thousands of refugees, but due to circumstances beyond control, only around 1,200 were able to arrive and make new lives in Manila. It must have been difficult for these refugees to start anew so far from their homeland, in a country that I am told many of them were unfamiliar with. In a sense, my family and I know what this is like. We left our home in the Philippines, which was then under the oppression of the Marcos dictatorship, and found sanctuary in Boston. However different the situation may be, the sadness of being torn away from familiar surroundings can be tempered by the warmth and friendship you encounter in a strange environment, which our countrymen demonstrated to our Jewish friends. Here in the Philippines, strengthened by the hospitality they received, these refugees were able to start fresh, to work, study, worship, and live alongside Filipinos. In fact, in a book written by the Jesuit historian Father Horacio de la Costa, there appears a letter from an unnamed Jew, addressed to the then mayor of Manila. In this letter, this man makes an appeal on behalf of the hundreds of children who were wandering the streets at that time. Let me emphasize, this was in the middle of war. Just like anyone else, this man would have had to contend with hunger, with illness, and with the oppression of the ruling forces. But still, he chose to look beyond himself, to propose ways to help feed those starving children, and to volunteer himself to assist in this endeavor, ready to sacrifice whatever he had in those very difficult times. He was motivated by nothing less than the solidarity that Filipinos had earlier shown him and his people. And in his own words, may I quote, "I am still a foreigner, a man without a country, but my gratitude and love to the Filipinos encouraged me to send this letter to you," close quote. I believe that this man's letter distills into a few important lessons the story of the Jewish escape to Manila. First, that it is the imperative of all men to take a stand against wrongdoing, wherever it may be. Second, that we must do our part to provide a new life, a better life, to all those who would be deprived of life whether by tyranny or by poverty. And last, that the measure of our humanity is our ability to give of ourselves, even and perhaps most importantly, when it hurts. A few of our guests have already lived through this story and have seen its lessons in practice in their lives. The rest of us can be heartened by the fact that as we look back on our shared history and rekindle old friendships, we can see striking similarities to the relationships we are forging today. I take this opportunity to extend our gratitude to Russ Hodge, Cindy Scott, Dr. Barbara Sasser, Peggy Ellis, the rest of the team behind Rescue in the Philippines, and other Jewish organizations for their generous assistance, especially after Typhoon Haiyan struck our country. From arranging for the donation of my writers tell me $2.5 million worth of prosthetics to raising around $1.4 million for the survivors of the typhoon. I believe that in this aspect, at least, history comes full circle. Today, we pay tribute to that remarkable time in Philippine history within the walls of Malacañan Palace, the seat of Manuel Quezon's presidency, the presidency that ensured that those who fled Nazism could find a home in our country. We Filipinos who once extended a helping hand to our Jewish brothers and sisters in the face of oppression now receive the same as we work to build back better and overcome emerging challenges in the wake of Haiyan. Thus, it is my sincere hope that all those who watch this documentary, whether here today or in classrooms and homes in the coming years, will continue this virtuous cycle, will continue to make the choice to always help their fellow men, whatever the future may bring. Now I get to the part, and I beg your indulgence of ad-libbing a little. Hopefully my writers will not be too scared. Martial law was declared when I was a boy of 12 years old, and our world turned topsy-turvy. And I have to confess, this was the point in time, just starting or being a preteen, when my love for reading, for instance, really got nurtured. And to be honest with you, amongst the books that I was truly interested in were a lot of the books by an author called Leon Uris, who talked about the Jewish struggle. And of course, the movies like Exodus and Cast a Giant Shadow, which I tend to watch every now and then. They tell of the struggle, they tell of doing with very little and accomplishing so much. Also, later on, probably when we were already in Boston, I got to see a film talking about the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. And especially in the darkest moments of the martial law era, when at some point I asked my father, why is it that if we are fighting for the truth and for that which is right, there seems to be too little of our countrymen joining us? And we do see in the experience of people facing oppression a commonality of what they have to undergo, the sufferings that they have to undertake, and the strengthening of the character and the resolve that eventually leads to the triumph of right over wrong. And perhaps I can say it publicly that all of these books, these movies, these discussions truly were very significant influences on me, and perhaps it also gives me insight on how to govern these days. For instance, in the film on the Jewish uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, a very significant portion of the film dealt with all of the conflicts between those who were pacifists, those who were aiming or agitating for armed uprising, and everybody in between who couldn't decide which way to go to. It does tell me that our process of consensus building really is the process that we have to undertake if we have to have the solid foundation to have long-lasting changes in this country. Perhaps I can end by a quote attributed to Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's a German Lutheran pastor and also concentration camp victim. And this, when I believe I first heard it from my father, really set the tone for a lot of the directions that I also tried to live by. And I quote, "First they came for the communists, but I was not a communist, so I did not speak out. Then they came for the socialists and the trade unionists, but I was neither, so I did not speak out. Then they came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I did not speak out. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak out for me," close quote. And, perhaps just not the Jewish people, but growing up in a household, we had a Russian descendant. And it turns out, I asked my father, why are there so many Russians in our country? Then it tells me that after the Russian Revolution, a lot of the white Russians made the Philippines their home, and a lot of them actually wound up in Central Luzon. Later on, after the Vietnam era, or the Vietnam War era, the Philippines again became host to a lot of refugees, the so-called Vietnamese boat people. It is ironic in a sense because our immigration laws are some of the most stringent. But whenever there is an emergency, it seems our country, through various decades and various epochs, has always stood up to address the needs of their fellow men. This we hope to encourage further, and hopefully rekindling our memories of the history, or of our shared history, will enliven the dedication of the generations present and to come, that this is really a shared responsibility. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon.